Hello, thank you for joining us. Today I've got with me Laura Colebrook. She's a solicitor at THP Solicitors in their dispute resolution department. And she's joined me to talk about the Coronavirus Act, which was brought in by the government during COVID-19 to basically give a buffer for residential and commercial tenants who may be struggling to pay their rent during this period. But obviously that has a knock-on financial effect for landlords. So I know things have changed this month, Laura. So do you want to give me a brief outline onto the coronavirus and what it means?
Yes, so as you say, the Coronavirus Act became law back in 25th of March of this year, and it was an emergency act put in place to curb the spread of COVID-19, and essentially it gives the government authority to grant and restrict powers and help the people. So what does this mean for landlords and tenants? So at the time of passing, although a landlord's right to rent and other payments remained in force, the government imposed a suspension on evictions for both criminal and residential premises. And as you say, it was essentially a tool to protect the tenants during this pandemic.
And things have changed in September, haven't they?
Yes, they have. The suspension on evictions has come to an end. So for commercial premises, after the 30th of September, it will become possible to forfeit leases for non-payment of rent, which also includes service charges and insurance rent. Similar provisions also apply for residential tenancies, and that came into effect on the 20th of September. So essentially, in that situation, the stay has been lifted and procedures to evict a tenant can resume.
But some of those procedures have changed, haven't they, somewhat from what happened pre the Coronavirus Act with regard to notice periods, etc.?
Yes, I mean, it's always very important for a landlord to follow the correct processes, as an illegal eviction of a tenant is actually a criminal offence. So on residential matters, if a landlord has not served a notice of their intention to evict, that must be done in the first instance. So there are two types of notices, either a Section 21 notice to evict tenants for any reason, or a Section 8 notice for when the tenant has breached the tenancy agreement, which would obviously include non-payment of rent, but that's got to be for 2 months or more. So the notice periods have changed over this time period. I believe now since the 29th of August to the 31st of March next year, the minimum notice period is now 6 months, although there are exceptions that apply. So when a notice expires, if the tenant doesn't leave the property, the landlord will have to obtain a court order. And failing that, if the tenant still doesn't leave, then they'll have to return to court to obtain a bailiff warrant to remove the tenant.
I'm presuming because obviously there's been a long period now where landlords have not been able to take action, and there's going to be a lot of tenants, unfortunately, both in the commercial and residential world, that are going to be affected by the Coronavirus Act. This is going to cause a huge backlog, I presume, in the courts of people trying to take action now.
Oh yes, absolutely. There was the process was lengthy in the first place, and now it's going to be even more lengthy. And although the court's going to try and prioritise, it still leaves a backlog, and people with current issues are just going to go back to at the back of the queue, essentially.
Yeah. So, are there any advice you might give to landlords, or maybe other alternative ways they might be looking to kind of speak to their tenants and maybe try and find an amicable solution?
I mean, absolutely. There are options. Going to court is seen as a last resort. It's inherently risky. Alternatives are highly encouraged. Parties should attempt to negotiate to either defer or reduce rent. Even the possibility of suspending for a period of time should be considered. But whichever route is agreed, it is important though that any decisions must be documented very carefully to ensure that there are no problems between the parties in the future.
And I presume basically it would be sensible to get some legal advice, because essentially people need to know the implications of what it is they're agreeing to.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. Yeah, well, good luck to landlords and tenants out there who basically maybe they're trying to kind of retain where they live or work, or basically try and get some finances back in. But yeah, fingers crossed this will all be over soon. Thanks.
Well, thank
Bye.
you.